Don't force me out. I think I need to get to that. Is it back there? Yes, back there. It's up here? And I'm more confused than I thought. It's over here? Man, I got it. Yeah, I'm looking for the mic. Oh, Kevin. No. Oh, you found it there. I promise to cut a little bit off because I'm taking so long. I'm sorry. Even Daniel's talking about me over here. All right. Well, thank you for being patient with me. I always need a little help. I want to talk to you tonight. I want to finish some thoughts that we've been talking about that have to do with this idea of shepherding and some biblical considerations for us to think about. I appreciate, as always, you listening so well. You always are very attentive, and I do appreciate that. Let me mention a couple of things before I begin the lesson tonight. The ladies' class that we normally have at our house once a month will meet tonight. So if you're a lady and can go to that, please remember that. Also, the class that we have monthly is going to meet at our house tomorrow night at 7, the class on Ecclesiastes, so consider that. And if you can, please come to that. I also wanted to make you aware that I think the Clarks are back tonight. They've been in Mississippi, and Greg's aunt had passed away, so they've been there for a funeral. It's good to have them back. And also, Sam Childress mentioned a friend of his, Gene Lindley, friend of their family, who is evidently close to death. And Sam wanted us to be praying for that family, so please keep Gene Lindley in your prayers if you would. And then also, next Sunday morning, we have invited all of our parents of our college students, and hopefully several of them will come, so I hope that you'll make your plans to remember that, and then we'll all get together for lunch away from here afterwards, so we can get to know them a little bit better and they can get to know us. That's always something that has gone very well, and I think the parents of our college students really enjoy that. And I think we enjoy that as well. It's good for us to get to know them. It's good for them to worship with us and get to see what their sons and daughters are a part of on a weekly basis. So I know that we will look forward to that. We've been talking about this idea of pursuing more shepherds. We've talked about the role of a shepherd, which is a spiritual service. We've talked about this morning the qualities of the man that we're looking for. And tonight, I want to look particularly at this idea of shepherds and sheep and how they relate to each other. This is not just about what we're looking for. This is, in very large measure, maybe some things that we need to consider as we're thinking about this, and some responsibilities that we have even as sheep. So I want us to accomplish a couple things. Let us see what we're looking for, continue to pursue that, but at the same time, we need to understand and know a little bit more about how sheep are to act toward the shepherds. And so I want us to consider that tonight as we think about these particular things. You know, God's people, and as I said this morning, God's people need strong leaders. Any organization, and that's not to make the church an organization, but any group, that may be the better way to say that, needs strong leadership. If you're looking for in a government, you need strong leaders. If you're looking in the home, you need strong leaders. And if you're looking for a church, a local church, certainly you need strong leaders in that as well. But not only do you need leaders, you need followers. There'd be no reason to have leaders if there weren't followers to follow the leader, so to speak. And so that's important. And there are really three types of leaders, or rather three types of followers. There's an aggressive type, and that follower is typically one that is most of the time questioning things that the leaders may do. They're more aggressive. Then you have some that are more passive. They don't question anything, and they're not really concerned for that much about what goes on. And I think both of those are really two extremes that we want to shy away from. If we're going to be sheep, and if we're going to be led by shepherds, we need to be people who are concerned. We need to be people who do care. We have to understand our role to those who are shepherds, but we certainly want to be people who do care. So I want us to think about it particularly tonight as we think about this passage in 1 Thessalonians 5. I want you to turn there if you would. I mean, I've got most of these passages on the chart behind me, but if you want to turn there, I would suggest that you do. I want us to look at this and kind of use this as our text tonight to talk about really three ways that sheep need to respond to shepherds. And when we do that, we're also going to learn some things about what shepherds are. So we're still looking at what a shepherd is, but we're doing that from a different perspective. We're doing that really looking at how the sheep respond to that shepherd. And that helps us then understand what a shepherd is. So notice this passage in 1 Thessalonians 5, beginning verse 12. We urge you, brethren, to recognize those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you, and to esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake. Be at peace among yourselves. I want to suggest out of this particular text, these two verses, I want to suggest three things, and we're going to kind of move away from this and look at several other passages that have to do with shepherds and have to do with sheep and how we relate to each other. But I want us to notice three things, as I said. The first thing that I want us to think about in reference to what sheep can do to help shepherds is this. We need to follow, if we're a sheep, we need to follow knowingly. Shepherds know the sheep. When you have a role that the men, we have three men who serve us. We have three men whom we have asked to serve in this capacity as shepherds. And because of that, they have accepted a role, they have accepted a responsibility that says, I am willing to acknowledge not only the fact that you are a sheep, but I'm willing to acknowledge the fact that you have asked me to serve in this capacity, to really shepherd over your soul. The word that's used in 1 Thessalonians 5, in the English Standard Version anyway, is respect. The passage that I read for you out of the New King James Version says, recognize. I'm confident that if I ask you to recognize our shepherds, you could do that. Those of you who are members here, you would recognize Mitch and you would recognize Randy. You would have trouble recognizing John since he's away today. But those of you who are members here and have been for any length of time, you would recognize these men as shepherds. You would recognize them physically. That's not what Paul is saying. You'd have to do that. But what Paul, I believe, is saying is when you recognize and you respect them, he's saying you experience them. You become intimate in all the right kind of ways with them. You need to know them. You need to know that they are real people. You need to know that they are like you. You need to know that they are interested in you. You need to know that it is not just a one-sided relationship. It is not just them wanting to know you. It is you wanting to know them. The responsibility that you've been given is to respect and to have this relationship. And I think to recognize, and I would even include in that to respond, a lot of R's there. And those are things that we are asked to do for those who would be shepherds among us. And then that text in 1 Thessalonians also says this. It says that you are to respect them for their labor. You're to notice their work. And I want to talk to you for just a minute about this. You may or may not know the work that they do. There is some work they do that there's no reason for you to know. And what I mean by that is there are some things that need to be kept and left to confidentiality. That's the nature of their work. Now, not everything is that way. And some of the ways in which they help us are ways that are more collective than they are individual. And those things vary with each circumstance. But the fact of the matter is that we may not know their work, but we need to be aware as much as we can of what they do. I'm going to tell you what. They have asked me since I have been here. The elders who have been elders and shepherds here since I have been here, and I think this has happened with previous men who have been evangelists here. They have been asked to be a part. They asked me to be a part of their meetings. Not so much that they need my help, but I think it's the fact that they understand that the evangelist is a part of the work, maybe in a different way than anybody else. Not a more important way, but certainly in a different kind of way. And so as a result, they have asked me to be a part of these meetings. But I will tell you that there are a lot of things, folks. There are a lot of things that go on when the shepherds meet in those meetings that I'm going to tell you, you don't want to know about. And here's why I say that, because they're hard things. There's discussions that are hard things. There are situations that are hard things. And they're hard because people have messed up lives. People make serious mistakes with their lives. People make mistakes with their lives that affect their eternal destiny. And the responsibility primarily that these three men who shepherd us have is looking out and helping those of us who in essence have messed up our lives. That's not all they're about. But when you think about even your own life or my life and the way in which we alter that life to go against what God wants on some occasions, and yet these men are helping us be responsible for changing that. There are lives that are messed up. There are relational problems. There are problems between spouses. There are problems between spouses in this group that some of you, if not all of you, may not even know about. But because a husband or a wife or both have come to these men and asked them to help them, that's a part of their work. They have to be aware of doctrinal disagreements, doctrinal issues. They want what is taught here to be what God said. That's exactly what I want. And sometimes those things are not easy. Sometimes those things are difficult. Sometimes we even differ on some of those things. Those, many times, are hard conversations to have. They're even hard conversations among those men who serve as our shepherds. But the fact of the matter is, that's the nature of having this group. That's the nature of having this relationship. Shepherding is hard work. You're dealing with mature Christians. You're dealing with immature Christians. You're dealing with new converts. You're dealing with people who have been Christians for years and have particular ideas about particular things that should be or want to be or need to be done. And on and on and on the list goes. You can imagine. I'm not telling you something that you don't. At least I don't think I am. I'm not trying to tell you anything. But I want to share that with you because shepherding is hard work. There are sleepless nights. And that is the case because they love our souls. They've been given. They've been asked to serve in that capacity. And they do that not because they are well paid to do it at all. They do it because they love us. And because they are concerned about our souls. There are tough conversations. There are tough decisions that have to be made. And I just share all that with you, again, not because you don't know, but I want you to think about that. If you are considered to serve as one of our new shepherds, you need to think about that. You need to understand what will be asked of you. We would select men among us, as we have with these three others, who would look at these tough and hard situations and not shy away from them, but be willing to accept it. Now, not every situation is that way. There are other responsibilities and issues that these men have to deal with. But it's not glamorous at all. And it's very sobering. And we all need to understand they do that because they are willing to and because they want to help us in every way. Look at these passages, if you will, that have to do with this. 1 Peter 5, verse 2. When Peter writes as a fellow elder to other elders, he says, "Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly." I mean, Peter says you need to exercise oversight, and you need to do that willingly, and you need to do that eagerly. I can promise you that there are times when eagerly may not be the adverb to describe how well they do that. But he says, that's what I want you. And sometimes that's difficult. We don't do it. We do it willingly. They do it willingly, and they do it eagerly. That's the way in which they need to operate. That's the way they need to exercise this oversight. And that sometimes, again, is difficult to do. Acts 20:28. This is a passage that we're very familiar with. Paul would say to those elders at Ephesus when he met them at Miletus, "Therefore take heed to yourselves, to all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd." That's the idea of caring for the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. Peter says you need to care for the church of God, or Paul rather would say that. So a good shepherd, listen carefully, a good shepherd wants to help you. A good shepherd wants to help take care of you. A good shepherd does not intrude where he's not needed. But a good shepherd understands the responsibility he has, and he wants to care for every single one of us. And sometimes what that means is this, that they have to step into our lives. They may even have to step into our lives when we don't want them to. But because of the responsibility that they have been asked to serve in, that role, they may, on occasion, have to step in. And here's why they step in. Obey those who have the rule over you and be submissive, for they watch out for your souls as those who must give account. Let them do so with joy, not with grief, for that would be unprofitable for you. I'm going to look at some of this a little bit later in this lesson. But what I want you to pay attention to right now is that they watch out for your souls as those who would give account. They know this, and others in this audience, like Bobby, who has served before, understand this. But when you accept this responsibility, I'm going to use the term, and it is not an overstatement. It can be overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. But it is something that they do. And they do it because they understand at some point they will have to give an account for how they have done that. That's a responsibility that is exclusively theirs, you understand. There's some responsibility that I will face as a result of my work, but I don't know that I will have to give an account for your souls. I may have to give an account for mine and the things that I have tried to help you understand. But I don't know anywhere in Scripture that tells me that I'm going to give an account for your souls. But that's exactly what the Hebrew writer says they will face. And you think about that. You think about the fact that they are going to be held accountable. That can be overwhelming. And all of this happens. All this can be made better when we know them and they know us. That's why I would bring to your attention first, we have to follow knowingly. We have to build the relationship. They build it with us and we build it with them. Anytime you're closer to somebody, that's going to do nothing but help the relationship. So not only do we need to do that with the men who serve now, but listen carefully. We need to think about that with the men who we may feel like are capable of becoming more shepherds. Those men. Think about that and the relationship that we have. Secondly, let me suggest this. We need to follow lovingly. Let's back to 1 Thessalonians 5:13. And to esteem them very highly in love for their works' sake. You see what that says? Sometimes we read Scripture, and I have this fault as well. Sometimes we read it and we really don't follow. We really don't think about what he said. He says, to esteem them very highly in love. Not just esteem them, but esteem them very highly in love. So we go from respecting or recognizing them, which is really an attitude. Okay, it's an attitude that I have toward them, to an action. Now we've moved from what I think about it in my mind. Now we think about it from what do I do? I esteem them very highly in love. I love them. I love them in a different kind of way. I have a loving opinion of them. And that goes both ways. We can help have a loving opinion of them, and they have a loving opinion of us. And sometimes that is different. Sometimes that's even difficult. But that's the relationship that we need to have. That's the approach. That's the action that we need to have toward them. You know, sharing with them, talking with them, that needs to be something we look forward to. It's a pleasant thing. It's a positive thing. You know, sometimes I've heard people say, well, I got to meet with the elders. It's like it's the worst thing in the world that can happen. The fact of the matter is, that's one of the best things that can happen to us. meeting with them, getting their input, them helping us understand what it is that we can do. That's something that we need to do for them. And we do esteem them very highly. He says that because sometimes that may be hard to do. Let me just kind of parenthetically say this. You know, sometimes shepherds get burned out. You probably don't find that too hard to believe. I can remember one back in Tampa with the University Church through the years. One man particularly came to me, and one Sunday morning, he kind of pulled me off the side. He said, I want to tell you something before I tell anybody else, because he and I were very close. He said, I'm going to resign today. Well, of course, I thought he was very effective. And he was very effective. And I asked him what you would expect me to ask him, and that was, well, why is it that you're doing that? And his exact words to me were this: I just can't take it anymore. And he said, I want to explain it. He said, I don't mean that this is all bad, but he said, I'm just burned out. I'm just overwhelmed by all of this. And as he began to explain to me that, I began to understand that. We need to esteem those. We need to let them know how much we appreciate and love them for their work's sake. We need to let them know how we feel about them. We follow someone easily that we esteem, don't we? If we have great confidence in them, if we hold them up, it's easier for us to follow them. And the opposite's true. If we don't esteem them for their work's sake, it's very difficult for us to follow them. But if we esteem them for their work's sake, it's very easy for us to follow them. Let me share this passage with you. I love this passage, Hebrews 13:7. The writer says, remember those who rule over you, who have spoken the word of God to you, whose faith follow, that's the idea of imitate, considering the outcome of their conduct, which is, as we all know, really just their way of life. Why should we imitate them? Well, this passage tells us that we should follow their faith, whose faith follow or imitate, considering the outcome of their conduct. We need to look at these men, and we need to look at where their lives not are headed, but basically where they've ended up. What are we looking at in terms of what their lives have produced? The Hebrew writer says that elders are the picture of spiritual, listen carefully, they are the picture of spiritual success. They're not perfect. They make mistakes. But the outcome of their conduct is something that we ought to want to emulate, to imitate, to strive for. I mean, that's why we would select them. Yes, those qualities that we talked about this morning, all those things are important. They help us paint the picture of the type of man, as I said numerous times, and I will say again, I understand that. But let's look at what's happened in their own situations. It's not only the men who have the good outcome. It's their families that have the good outcome. Look at their wives. Look at their children. Look at their circumstances in life. And I'm not talking about being some financial success. We're not talking about those kinds of things. We're talking about spiritual successes. Now, may I say this? They are not just the go-to people to look at to say, well, if I've got a problem, I go to them. They're the go-to people to look at to say, that's what I want to be like. And again, it's not perfection. If it's perfection, the three men who serve us now, they don't come close to that. None of them do. None of them will. But in my experience with them, the conclusion of their lives as I see that, and this is a subjective statement, but I think you would tend to agree with that, if not fully agree. The outcome of their life to this point is very successful spiritually. And those are the kind of people, those are the kind of men, those are the kind of circumstances in the lives of men that the Hebrew writer says you need to imitate. And you need to consider the outcome of their conduct. You need to think about that. Because that's a great advantage for us. And there are some easy ways to love them because we see what their lives have produced. And again, I want to stress, they're not perfect people. But those are the kind of people that we can hold up in a good kind of way. Not hold up to say they're better than or more important than in any kind of way, but to say, this is what we're trying to do. This is the kind of situation I want even in my family. That's the kind of man I want to be. That's the kind of wife I want my wife to be. Those are the kind of kids that I want my kids to be. And that becomes important to us, to think about those very kinds of things. Well, let me ask this question. What are some practical ways we can love them? Let me mention three quickly. We can be an easy sheep. I thought about how to say that. That's the easiest way I know. Just be an easy sheep. Or put a different way, don't be a troublemaker. Don't be a problem. Don't have a messy life. No, I'm not saying, well, I'm past that, Kenny. That's fine. But you know, we need to do what we can to help them. Help them in every way that we can. We need to speak highly of them. We need to speak highly of them. We need to emphasize the good that they do. We know they have faults. They know they have faults. They are not naive, nor are we, to those kinds of things. But listen to me. They're just like me. Let me tell you something. The preacher wants everybody to like him too. Elders want everybody to like them. But you know, we have responsibilities. We have roles to play where that may not be the case. You may not like every decision that they make, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. You may not like every lesson I preach. You may not like any lesson I preach. But at least to this point in time in my life, this is a responsibility that I have been asked to serve in, and I have accepted that role. But understand that we need to speak as kindly and as positively about not only the men themselves, but their families as well. Be positive about them to your family. Sometimes, you know, we don't like the way something's going. We have a tendency to talk bad about them to other people, maybe to our families. And sometimes we might even have a tendency to talk badly about them, or at least not in the greatest kind of way, even to our kids. Let me tell you something, please. We need to be very careful. We need to be very careful about what we say and about who we say it to. And we need to hold these men up. And all men who are leaders in any kind of, and really this is a common thing that all of us need to do. With everybody, we need to speak as highly as we can about people, as kindly as we can about people, and help them in that way. Speak highly of them, and then certainly pray for them. Rarely does a prayer go spoken in our collective assembly that the elders aren't mentioned. God help them. God help their families. And I'm sure they're listening for it. I know they are. I'm listening for it, and I hear it. Because I'll tell you something else I listen for it. Bless Kenny. Help him have clarity of mind. I heard that every week, every night of the meeting last week, and I thought, have I lost my mind? Is that why they keep praying for my clarity? But I told them how much I appreciated that. Pray for these men. Pray for them. Please, pray for them. And then the last thing I want to suggest to you is that we need to follow peacefully. That's back to 1 Thessalonians 5:13. That says, be at peace among yourselves. You notice who else prays for peace? Elders pray for peace. When our shepherds pray publicly, I hear them. I can recall several times when they've said things like, we're thankful for the unity that is part of this group here at Collinsville. Well, that's exactly what we need to be. That's exactly the kind of people we'd be, and that's exactly what they want us to be. They pray for peace a lot. There are very few things that are more painful than church problems. There are very few things that are more painful than church discord. And this church is not immune. Unless it is basically a new local church, I don't know any church anywhere that hasn't had some level, some form of discord. Some level of division, some divisiveness that has taken place. And this church is no exception. I don't know everything about this history. And what's happened in the past, at least to some degree, I don't need to know. It's none of my business. But I know enough about it to know this, that it's not pleasant. Not pleasant to anybody. And what we need to be praying for is that we continue the wonderful peace that I believe is through and through this particular group and has been for many years. I think that is a wonderful thing for us to keep in our minds. I have, during this past year, 2019, I'm thinking of one church particularly where I was at in the meeting. And over the course of the week, as I typically do, I will ask members, especially those who are older, who've been with particular local churches for some period of time, tell me about the history of this church. And I can remember on the occasion in which I asked this, I was asking a gentleman, and a lady overheard me. She said, I can help you with that. I said, well, good. She said, I've written the history, and I'll give it to you. So she printed it out one night and gave it to me the next night. And when I got that list, it had the names of the preachers who had been there. And I recognized most of the names, and as I began to look at those names, I noticed not only did it have the names of the preachers, it had the years they were there. And every one of them stayed either 1 or 2 years. And I thought, I better get in my truck and head on back home. And it just kind of resonated with me. There was one man who stayed there 15 years. And I know him, and I know him well. He said it was the longest 15 years of his life. There was one common denominator in the whole history of that church. One elder among the group. The whole history, that was the common denominator. And everywhere that I heard from those different men, and some of them were still in that area, they even thanked me for coming to that particular church. And I told them, I said, everything appears to me to be going very well. And they concurred with that. But you know, folks, all of us, every single one of us, regardless of our role, have to work toward being at peace among ourselves. And sometimes that's a very difficult thing to do. Shepherds and sheep can create discord. Shepherds and sheep and preachers, and deacons and members and song leaders and anybody else can create discord. All of us, as much as in us lies, as the Hebrew writer says, must be at peace with all men. That's a big responsibility. Back to this passage in Hebrews 13. Obey those who rule over you and be submissive. For they watch out for your souls as those who must give account. Let them do so with joy and not with grief, for that would be unprofitable for you. Obey and submit. Those are words that everybody likes to hear these days. Obey and submit. We all obey. We're asked to obey, and we're all asked to submit. Jesus submitted to his Father. Man is to submit to Jesus. There is a very real sense in which woman is to submit to man, and we all submit in essence to God. Submission is part of our life. It's not always easy, and submission is not always agreeing with what is being said. Let me read you really what I think is the best definition of that. Submission is accepting my role. This text tells us that we are to submit to those who have the rule over us. We are to obey them. And I'm not going to get into the nuance and all the issues about that, but the fact of the matter is, that's what that passage says. Let me tell you what makes that work. And this is very important. When I'm willing to obey those who have the rule over me and to be submissive, it is because I trust them immensely. I trust them. Beth and I, a couple of weeks ago, really last week, I guess, or the week before, we made, as I told you, we made a quick trip to Gainesville, Florida. It's the church where Phil Robertson preaches. That we didn't go down there for that reason, but that's where Phil is. It's a Glen Springs church, and I don't mind telling you that because I'm very fond of that church, very fond of that church. Beth and I stayed with Mark and Diana Lloyd. He's one of the elders there, and has been an elder there for over 30 years. And the first time that I went there, and this has been years ago, I noticed a difference. I just noticed what I thought was a difference. And I'm not going to get into all that they do. But I really want to tell you, as he began to explain to me some of the things that they were doing, and as he began to explain to me the way that the group responded to him, it dawned on me what the issue was. I told him, I said, Mark, they do that. They respond that way because they trust you. They trust you and those other men. They trust you completely. Now, I don't mean by that they think you're inerrant or that they don't think you can make bad judgments, but you have proven by your conduct and by your ability to serve in the capacity that they're all on board with you now. And his wife, Dinah, looked at me and she said, you know, I've never thought about that word, but that is exactly right. And it is. It is exactly that way. They trust those men. And because of that, there continues to be a peace in that group that I don't see many places. But I'm grateful for what they have there. But look for men. Let me put it to you this way. As we consider this idea of pursuing more shepherds, folks, we need to find men we can trust. That is of eminent importance. Let's look for men. Now, that's not all of it, but let's look for men that we can trust with our souls. Look for this peaceful recipe. This is Ephesians 4. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. That's a peaceful recipe right there. That's what we need to do. And when a church like us is at peace like us, you know who's trying to destroy that, right? You know Satan is looking for an opportunity to destroy us. There are a lot of good things happening among us, I believe. And I believe you believe that as well. But I can promise you there is at least one, and maybe more, who don't like that. And he will do everything he can to disrupt and to destroy the peace. And we can't let him do that. We need to be at peace among ourselves. And we are. I don't say that because there's a problem. I say that because I'm grateful for it. And our shepherds, I know, are grateful for that. And we want that to continue for years to come, as long as the Lord allows us to keep going. But there is a responsibility and there's a role that every single one of us plays with each other to do what we can do. You've heard me say this before. And I'm going to say it again. The potential here is tremendous. I think we've made progress. But I don't think we've touched the hem of the garment. And I think moving forward, if God allows us to do that, if we can continue to make good choices, if we can continue to work, and if we can continue to keep the devil at bay for the kingdom's sake, we can continue to do and to grow and to be everything that God wants us to be. That is exactly what is in my mind. I know that's what's in the mind of our shepherds. And so it is because of that particular idea that we want to continue to press on. We're not trying to eliminate or change what the past has been in any kind of way, but we need to move and we need to press on and we need to keep going and we need to amp it up, so to speak. And by finding more men to help lead that charge and to lead that effort, God's kingdom can continue to grow. I'm going to have some more to say about that. But I hope that you'll listen carefully to those things. I want to preach one more lesson. I keep adding on to this. I just want to preach one more lesson next Sunday night in reference to these things. And I want to try to bring all of this together as much as I can. We'll look at some passages, but I want to make some comments and some observations that I hope will help us as we consider the possibility of pursuing more shepherds. May God help us toward that end. Kenneth's going to lead us in an invitation song, and as I always say, and as we always want to encourage, if you have a spiritual need that we can help you with, come as we stand and as we sing.